Hi folks, this is a short little video about some simple operating and maintenance tips for a Dickinson Bulkhead diesel heater that you might not see shown elsewhere. One other thing I want to make clear here is that what I'll be talking about are my experiences with my stove and not directions on how you should operate your stove. You'll be likely using one of these stoves in a remote location and help may not be readily available. Please exercise a good bit of caution. And in addition to a fire extinguisher, I also keep one of these within reach, a fire blanket. Well, with that, let's get going. First, we'll look over two different ways of lighting this stove using diesel oil or alcohol. Then we'll look at soot problems from poor assembly. Then cleaning the stovepipe and cap. And then on a windy day, we'll see this barometric damper in action, and a flame out due to wind gusts and how to prevent it. And finally, we'll replace the window glass or mica. This will be on our Dickinson SIG 100 diesel heater on our 27-foot Orion sailboat. A little disclosure here, there is definitely a learning curve that builds with experience using these stoves day by day. And of course that's tailored to the differences in operation and the adaptation to various differences in installation of the heater on your boat. But chief among those are draft due to pipe length and bends that might be in that stovepipe. And then wind effects, particularly being turbulence downstream of obstacles on your deck. Okay, now let's look to starting. If you're new to starting this heater, be sure to check out Dickinson's short videos on YouTube. They also post some videos on maintenance topics. It's important to start with a clean heater pot, clean superheater, burn ring, and this low sulfur fuel heat adapter or reflector that sits on top of the assembly. Only in recent years has Dickinson included the reflector to help retain heat in the burn pot, because diesel fuels became low in sulfur mixes in more recent years and don't burn as hot. Also have nearby a fire extinguisher with at least an A and B rating, and then verify your CO and smoke detector is working. So here's the suggested start by Dickinson using a small pool of diesel at the bottom of the burn pot. With the components out right now, what we'll do is we'll turn the metering valve up to about 5 to get a pool of a couple of tablespoons or so of fuel in the burn pot. It'll look like approximately a 3-inch or so diameter pool of fuel at the bottom there. Then we'll turn off that metering valve, and then we'll put back in the superheater, then the burn ring, and finally the low sulfur fuel reflector. And then with all this assembled, then we'll drop a piece of paper to light the fuel down there at the bottom of the burn pot. And once that's ignited, we'll close the fire door, and then we'll turn the draft assist fan on. And then after a few minutes, we'll wait for the flames to get to the top of the burn ring. Turn the draft assist fan on. We'll let this burn off about 5 or 10 minutes. Then we'll turn the metering valve back up to a setting of about 2, and then we'll turn off that draft assist fan. So then we'll come back and revisit the heater in 10-20 minutes and make sure that the valve is adjusted to the right setting. It might go higher or lower than 2. Okay, so that's the diesel fuel approach by Dickinson. It's probably the safest way to start the stove. But what I'm not happy about is accumulation over time with burnt paper ash, and then the soot that accumulates from burning under oxygenated liquid diesel while the pot is heating up. So here's a second way, and this uses alcohol, 90%. And I read about this on a forum, but this can be very dangerous, and I'm not recommending it to anybody as far as starting the stove, but I'll show you what I do. So I'll turn on the metering valve to about 5 or so to get a small pool of diesel in the bottom of the pot, just like the first method, but not quite as long, maybe just 30 seconds or so, and a little bit less diesel than the other method. Then I'll add about 2 tablespoons of alcohol, 90%, dial the valve back to 2, partially close the fire door, to avoid getting burned, because this alcohol is pretty explosive. And I'll use this curved lighter to start with the door partially closed. There may be a puff of flame coming out. So often it'll probably take a time or two to get this alcohol to actually ignite and the draft to get started. The warmer the stove is after successive attempts, the more likely a puff of flame will come out the stove door. So be really careful with that. But once it does start burning and stay burning, I'll close the door, and then I'll make sure that there is flame. It's kind of hard to see because it's near the bottom of the part. And then I'll start the draft assist fan. The flame will be totally blue, and after a couple minutes the flame tips will start showing a little bit of white, maybe about 3 or 4 minutes. And then they'll move up out of the pot to the burn ring. And at this time, it's time to turn off the draft assist fan. But make sure the flame is up to the burn ring. And if it stays mostly in the pot, you don't have enough fuel, diesel fuel, and on a windy day like this, you can flame out. Don't add alcohol at this point. You're going to be asking for trouble. The safest thing to do is turn off the metering valve, wait for the pot to cool a bit, and then restart. And if there's enough leftover heat, you can relight the diesel vapor that's down there in the fuel pot. I wouldn't use alcohol. It's just too likely to explode. Now, if you're just starting out using your diesel heater, I strongly suggest getting one of these infrared thermometers. You can pick up one at Harbor Freight for, I don't know, it was pretty cheap. I forgot what I paid for it, but most of these come with a laser pointer to help verify what object you're getting a temperature reading off of. And once the after you get through a burn or two, you're pretty confident in what gets heated. And so I check all nearby surfaces near the stove as well as the stove itself, and then I subsequently check back again at higher settings. A word now on a bad experience I've had. On my second burn with this stove, I wasn't paying enough attention to reassembly. I don't know why the burn ring didn't set all the way down, but it didn't. It was covering the top row of holes, which are oval and circular in shape. And when that happened, it suffocated the flame a bit. And as a result, after about an hour or two of burning, my fire door window was covered completely, almost completely, with soot. And so was everything else, from the burn pot all the way up to the chimney cap. And seeing black smoke coming out of the chimney is a bad thing. Well, now with everything in the burn pot up to the chimney cap covered in very dark, very powdery soot that easily flaked off, the best approach I've found is to vacuum it with your shop vac. It easily flakes off and blows off the stove and pipe surfaces, and attempting to wipe it up off of the boat surfaces, it's just asking for trouble. It smears into whatever it's on, making cleanup even more tedious. So, as I mentioned, I use the shop vac and fine wire brushes on the interior stove pieces. And then from the deck fitting with the Charlie Noble off, I ran the shop vac's hose down through the stovepipe to the stove itself with a piece of steel wool attached to the end of the hose. If you're careful in running that stove at close to optimum fuel-air ratio, cleanup is quick and easy. This is a condition of stove parts here. After 6 days with 6 starts and about a 5 to 7 hour burn for each day, totaling over 30 hours of use for the week. I use a small bronze wire brush from Harbor Freight that won't rust to clean off carbon buildup in the burn pot and on the heater components. It's important to clean the carbon deposits off, as they'll be the site for further buildup if it's not cleaned away. A few more tips here. You can't leave the stove unattended, which in my experience means I will be on or near the boat when it's lit. If the fire goes out, oil will continue to flow out of the metering valve into the stove, into the heater pot, and it'll fill the pot or stove, and potentially you might even restart and then overheat with that excess oil from the pot. So the other thing I wanted to mention, per installation instructions from Dickinson's, I have a shutoff valve pretty close to the heater here. It's a ball valve near the stove, and you must turn this valve off when shutting down the stove. One night I turned the metering valve off, but I forgot to turn the ball valve off. The flame went out fine, but then the next morning I found that there was oil all over the little square pan at the bottom of the stove, and since the pan is not sealed, oil leaked out onto my seat cushion below that. Yeah. So I subsequently added this overflow bottle. It's a little plastic bottle. I can see if there's oil in there. That'll catch the overflow, and if I forget to do that sometime. And I also found from one of my viewers that oil may leak out of that overflow on a good heel when you're sailing. Anyway, this experience may just be for the gravity feed fuel delivery system like I have, but I think it is something to do with the metering valve itself. Okay, so I have 5 feet of chimney. Dickinson recommends at least 4. They also recommend this barometric damper to help help the draft adjust to outside and inside pressure differences, as you'd see on windy days. This is particularly an issue when wind gusts hit the boat, and then higher pressure outside blows smoke into the cabin, and then sometimes blows the flame out. Now you can help prevent this with higher heat setting and the draft assist fan being on. But you can see here I had too low of a heat setting. The flame at times went back down into the pot, and the flame got blown out. When this happens, turn off the fuel since it's still going to be flowing into the pot. If fuel has been running for more than several seconds after flame out, it'd be best to remove the excess oil to prevent overheating of the stove when relighting it. Of course, you want to make sure the stove's cool when you stick your hand in there. This is really hot stuff, 300-400 degrees. Dickinson advises allowing the stove to cool down before cleaning and relighting. This is the safest approach. Now there's one more thing I wanted to cover in this video, and that applies only to the SIG 100 Dickinson heater. The window, not glass, it's a thin slab of mica. It's a mineral. I suppose a curved piece of glass would be pretty expensive and also dangerous for a boat, and that it could break. My stove arrived with mica highly fractured, and during the first burn I put too much pressure on the window frame when closing it, and cracks in the mica grew to gaps. Although Dickinson doesn't make these stoves anymore, they still have parts including micas, and that sells for about $20 for a piece. Give you a 4x6 sheet, which is oversized. You'll need to cut it down to something like 3.5 by 5 inches using a very sharp blade like an X-Acto knife, or basically any very sharp thin knife. To remove the old mica from the door, from the fire door, you'll need to remove 9 8mm nuts, and be sure to save the 2 longest bolts for the latch. Hopefully you'll have enough of your old window left over to use it as a template. Otherwise, you might try using a 5x7 note card to trace out the window outline and the location of the bolts that you'll need to transfer over to the fresh slab of mica. Make sure to mark the holes for each of the bolts. As I mentioned, I used a 3/16 inch drill bit to cut the holes. And then the corners, since they could grab onto something and break the mica, I cut diagonal across the corners to somewhat round them off a little bit. Alright, so my mica window is cut, my holes are drilled, and now I need to mount it back onto this little door. And I have these little screws with the 8mm diameter nuts. Okay, well, that's a wrap on some simple maintenance and operating tips for a bulkhead diesel heater. I hope you found it interesting or helping your experiences with your own. Anyway, next video coming up will be our third part, the final part in our Apostle Island sailing trip. And on Lake Superior, we found some amazing scenery sailing around there, and some new experiences to share with you on that, and some beautiful hikes, along with some surprises on its trails. Anyway, following those visits to the Apostles, we went back to Bayfield to haul out. We'll show you that, dropping the mast and packing up for a somewhat troubled drive home. So join us for that. Till then, we'll see you next time.